Hello, and welcome to Doctor Who 50 Years Ago, a show that looks back to the episode that aired in 1970 and looks at the differences between then and now. This week, episode 3 of Inferno. Watch the glittery disco ball spin its way towards our doom. I'm Ben.
I'm Luke.
And I'm Nick.
And here we are, and here we go into the news from 1970. On Tuesday, the 19th of May, the general election campaign of 1970 begins in the United Kingdom, with Election Day to be Thursday, June the 18th. Harold Wilson says he favoured an early summer election to the BBC's Panorama programme. Negotiations to enter the common market were due to begin after the set election date, so it appears that Wilson is trying to quickly reassert his mandate to govern. The Conservatives have ideological troubles at the beginning of the campaign, with one seat in southwest London divided over two different candidates from the same party, one more right-wing than the other. In this case, the more liberal-minded MP remained as the candidate. On Saturday the 23rd of May, Conservative Party leader Edward Heath outlined his 4 attacks against the government, based on record numbers of wildcat strikes by unions, high taxation, the worst unemployment figures for 30 years, and the largest price rises in 20 years. He said, "The gap between a politician's promises and the government's performance has grown ever wider, and a Conservative government speaks the truth and will act with honesty." The opinion polls are in Labour's favour. So here we go. For the next 4 weeks, we have a general election in Britain, and it's not going to be out of the news, so we will continue to give you these election roundups.
Harold Wilson is playing a Theresa May here, isn't he? Trying to get a stonking mandate to go to Europe and begin negotiations, and the polls are all in his favour. We'll see how that pans out for him.
I'll be interested to see as we go on, because the general narrative nowadays is that it was fair amounts of bad luck on Wilson's side that meant that Heath got in. You know, you have the World Cup and some other stuff that goes on.
Well, one of the balance of payment figures, right?
Yeah.
Those two things supposedly combined to suddenly the dying death.
Exactly. So it'll be interesting to see how it looks as we go through it in real time, as it were.
Also on Tuesday the 19th of May, a working paper by the Television Research Committee does not agree with a growing conviction by the general public that there is a relationship between the media and deviant or law-breaking behaviour. Adolescents on probation were the study for this case, and there's a control sample of people from, quote, similar backgrounds, unquote, and a comparative sample from, again, quote, lower middle class, unquote, backgrounds. And this immediately screams to me the subject of class and how economic factors shaped the youth of the 1960s and 1970s.
Isn't it a shame that Mary Whitehouse didn't read this paper?
Well, maybe this one article is what did Hinchcliffe in all those years later.
We've not really changed that much. There's still plenty of, pearl clutching, but think of the children types that still exist, especially so in America. Here they kind of focus on class, and I think nowadays a similar study were to be done, they wouldn't talk about it as being class. They'd probably try and more talk about different kind of like ethnic groups and people from living in cities and people living in the countryside, things like that. I think people don't like to refer to class so much anymore.
No, they'll definitely refer to different cleavages in society.
Yeah, demographics. What? Yeah, they would prefer to go by demographics than class. Okay, in 1970, there was a more fixed idea of class, but now that's become very blurred. Someone who might claim to be working class can actually be wealthier than someone who claims to be middle class. It's very fuzzy now.
It's interesting how they would have divided it up. I mean, I haven't actually read the paper because if you read the article, it costs a whole 30 shillings. You know, what amount made of money? But I'd be really interested to see how they decided who was working class and who was lower middle class and how that affected the outcome.
That would certainly show their biases of the time, wouldn't it?
Absolutely.
And finally, on Wednesday the 20th of May, a government-appointed study group concludes that the easiest way of connecting public transport in London to the fast-growing Heathrow Airport is by extending the London Underground to it, as opposed to any other heavy rail solutions.
Now, that in itself is really, really boring. And I sent it to one of my friends who lives on the Piccadilly line and said, look, 50 years ago, they thought about this extension to the Piccadilly line. He didn't respond. But then I looked, and Hugh Jenkins, MP for Putney at the time, said that it was a stupid idea because the days of Heathrow are numbered due to the
Roscoe Commission.
Exactly. And I quote from the Times of London, the glide path to Heathrow covers millions of people living in thousands of houses, and they are simply not going to be sacrificed to the airlines and the British Airports Authority. As you can see, nothing's changed. They did sacrifice themselves. But it's good to see that 50 years ago, they were having the same argument. And if we're to be learning from history, it seems that this time the third runway probably will go ahead.
You say that, but
Yeah, but one specific
given the lack
small
of an
ball
airline industry right now.
Yeah, one small ball with like things sticking out of it is kind of causing a bit of a problem for that, Luke.
That's one way of describing a pathogen, dear. It's interesting to see the differences in general election campaigns, whether or not violence is connected to the media, and transport solutions between 50 years ago and now. That was the news, and now we shall get into Inferno, Episode 3, aired Saturday the 23rd of May 1970. Hello, parallel universes. What on earth can we say about you, really? It's that budding concept of science fiction, and contrary to popular belief, was always the intention of Don Horton for the concept to be included in this story. Instead, the Primords, the zombie humans, are the filler in this story, which will become more obvious in later episodes. And what more can I say other than it's a great concept and sold beautifully by the script, performances and direction.
I really wish you hate this episode, because then I can be contrarian and say it's good. Instead, I just have to say it's good and be boring. But yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah, this is where the serial really gets into it, isn't it? Like, it's this episode and the next three after it are the best. I suppose that now it makes sense that this was the original intention, and you just needed the Primords to be there as just the monster to kind of like push the action forwards. It would be quite difficult to do this without the impending threat of the drill going through the crust, wouldn't it? Just the Doctor turning up in 1984 Britain.
The Orwell version, not the Thatcher version, we hasten to add.
Yes.
Although differences and similarities between the two are wafer thin.
Yes, as V for Vendetta will show, as we talk about that later.
Exactly, yes. So we need to go down the alphabet to get to that point. Editor's note, this is terrible, and you should do another one. It's impossible to have a vendetta on this episode, so let's just talk about it anyway. The Doctor disappears from Earth, much to the annoyance of the Brigadier and Liz, and relief of Starman. Sir Keith is annoyed about Starman speeding up the project and is going to go to the Ministry to complain. However, Starman is confident that the Ministry backs a project, quote, vital to our industrial future, unquote. Starman's hands are going green, and the Brig's worried about his unsolved murders. Flashbang to the Doctor, who has materialised in his hut, but not as we know it. I think a visual effects designer as dictator kind of gives it away, but he'll get there.
Yeah, I wrote that in my notes, our industrial future. I thought, that seems particularly dated. Again, we've mentioned this a few times, haven't we, that this season has really shown the sort of post-war industry landscape and used that as its new quarry setting. And it feels like a time capsule that we're watching, doesn't it? This most of this stuff doesn't exist anymore. We've not lived in an industrial society for a long time now.
No, and you could potentially argue that in terms of industrial future, it's pretty forward-thinking, because ultimately all the people at the drill head are scientists in white lab coats, and therefore they are the white-collar, quite literally, middle class in charge of the project, rather than the drill workers.
Well, yeah, you're right, because industry now is mostly, in this country, is mostly very specialised, and so you don't just have your regular blue-collar workers on a factory line doing whatever. It's mostly very specialised workers who are highly skilled in what they do. So, as you say, more middle class.
Industry basically melted in the last 10 years.
I think it says something that now Doctor Who is shot in Wales, but doesn't go to quarries or have industrial sites. That really tells you something.
Yeah.
No, at time of recording, the last transmitted episode had the Doctor wake up in a random quarry for no particular reason. That shot stuck out.
Shut up, Ben.
All right,
Shut up.
Is it my fault I remember that one? I wasn't drunk enough, all right?
But what we can say is there is a notably reduced amount of quarries and industrial sites seen in New Who. Leaders are looking for like this energy source that we can just tap into and it'll be wonderful for us. And it's like, we're not too far off the North Sea oil, are we?
We're no. In 5 years' time, directed by Douglas Camfield, we will have Terror of the Zygons. And then, I don't know, for that, read Chris Chibnall's The Hungry Earth, Cold Blood and Fracking. Maybe? No, it wasn't to do with fracking. It was far too early to do with fracking.
It kind of was. I think what it shows is that people are always grasping at the new big energy source, and that's what this episode is tapping into. So 50 years ago, there was a stigma of governments going after new energy wherever they could find it, and that same thing is still now with fracking and...
The Doctor is shot at by armed men, and a chase ensues around the industrial works in and out of Bessie. Hiding on the gantries, the Doctor encounters one of the mutating scientists. A tussle ensues with a fire extinguisher. A second fight occurs with a mutating soldier, but the soldiers below shoot this one off the gantry. And just when the Doctor thinks he's escaped, he meets Liz in full clinical soldier's uniform, who holds him at gunpoint and takes him to the drilling as a prisoner. We meet one-eyed brigade leader Lethbridge-Stewart, Nicholas Courtney's finest role, Fight Me. Liz and the brigade leader's behaviour makes the Doctor realise that he is in a parallel universe, which nobody else believes because that's silly.
So we all know that Barry Letts was Buddhist and he wanted Buddhism in Doctor Who. And the symbol of this parallel universe's republic is this 3 arrows, where there's a big arrow going up and 2 smaller arrows coming out of it. There is 3 arrows in Buddhism. The first arrow is the pain of an event. The second arrow is how the mind reacts and the suffering that comes through that. But there is a lesser known third arrow, which is the pain deferred as you cling to pleasure. And so the fact that this would be the ruling arrow, it says something about how this parallel universe is thinking, how it's forcing everything away from it. I'm not saying this is exactly what Barry Letts or whoever was thinking, and we'll never know because there's nobody really alive who was involved in this serial. But I think it's interesting to bring up as something that was going on at the time.
With regards to using religious imagery in Doctor Who, is there anything in New Who that sort of we've used that as an inspiration in the show?
No, I would describe New Who as fairly secular, except for when we randomly include a Muslim in the God Complex.
But that's more in a way to be inclusive, like the show.
Yeah, that's more for inclusivity's sake, and then definitely so as we go into Whittaker's era.
Perhaps it shows that the writers now are less willing to subtly put in religious imagery or anything like that.
As they were brought up in an age which became increasingly secular and increasingly inclusive.
Interestingly, though, both have an agenda. Barry Letts had his Buddhist agenda, and Chibnall, and I hope this doesn't make me sound like a fascist, has a more liberal agenda.
Well, when we say liberal, we don't mean in the American context. At least I wouldn't read it. I mean more in the sort of socially liberal, but he's more of a... He's the most right-wing New Who writer that we've had, but he's socially liberal. We had an episode praising Space Amazon.
Oh, right, that kind of...
He's the sort of like... He's your typical middle-class liberal who's quite happy with the... It maybe wants taxes to go up slightly, but otherwise is pretty happy with the current situation. So I couldn't imagine something like Oxygen being written under Chris Chibnall. But what's interesting about this section when the Doctor first wakes up and then the chase until he gets captured by Liz is how efficiently it tells the story through visual means. So the Doctor wakes up. The first thing he sees is Big Brother, essentially, and unity is strength. Oh, hello. We now suddenly think something's very wrong here. Then he brings out his little like door gadget thing, which can't have been as impressive as you were making out to me in episode 1, Luke, because I went back and rewatched the Faceless ones because I finally got the animated DVD of it. There's automatic doors in Gatwick Airport in that serial, and that's in 1967. Yeah, it turns out that the reason why the Doctor's got his little like door gadget thing is for this bit when he holds it up to the parallel universe doors and they don't open. So again, it's another thing to show, oh, something's gone wrong here. Well, they've definitely tapped into that British Union of Fascists sort of symbol with the lightning bolt surrounded in a circle. It has that sort of same kind of visual colour style to it. So it looks like something that could be fascistic. This sort of visual storytelling, is it that unique, Luke? I can't imagine it was.
No.
But it's a sign of a good serial, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Yes.
And I don't feel like this happens enough nowadays, this sort of just clever little details like that. Certainly in the show's current iteration, it feels more like it has to tell us that we have to have a moment where the character turns around and says, this thing is X, or you're a very lovely character, aren't you? Or whatever, rather than just show us things on the screen and deduce from that ourselves.
It definitely appears to be a fault of modern Who storytelling, in that they continuously argue that brains are better than brawn. Unfortunately, there's a 5-page category speech dictating how brains are better than brawn, rather than just showing us through visual imagery, which is a more brawny aspect. We learn that the drilling is advanced in this universe, and that Sir Keith died in a car crash. But the computer has been sabotaged, and that Starman is infected. So many similarities, so many differences. These also include Sutton, whose speech is more refined. Ha! That's an oil joke. But he's still angry about what Starman is doing. Petra is still haughty, but still slightly worried about everything. And Britain is a republic with security forces and labour camps working on the project.
All right.
Ironic that Sutton has the more refined speech because he played a caveman in Unearthly Child.
Very true, yeah. It's credit to Derek Newman, because I was really captivated by his performance in this episode, just to understand the differences in this version of Sutton. And you can just hear it in his timbre.
Yeah, he's actually more likeable, this version, than the one in our universe, isn't he?
Yeah,
Definitely.
yeah.
This is where he becomes a likeable character, because I found him in the first episode to be quite unlikable, but here it's like there's a better him and alternate Petra work better as well, because she's more willing to, like, say, not put up with his nonsense sort of thing, which is interesting that the gender politics in the fascist dictatorship world seem to be better than in our universe at the time.
Very true. I've got a point about that in the next paragraph.
Why is there a Sir Keith Gold, or why is he a Sir in a republic?
Ooh.
Ha! This episode is brilliant. I love it. I'm being so contrarian by loving it. My God, I'm so special. Thanks, Nick.
Is it just they just didn't want to confuse people by giving him a different name, or just calling him Keith Gold?
You don't necessarily destroy the universities in a fascist hellhole.
No, you just underfund them instead.
Oof.
When the Doctor explains being in a parallel universe, but he refuses to say the simple phrase parallel universe, And I wanted to know, Luke, why is it that he couldn't just say parallel universe? Is this such a cutting-edge sci-fi idea at the time? Because I can't imagine it could have been.
Well, no, because you have parallel universes in Mirror Mirror in Star Trek a couple of years before.
Exactly. So why can't he just say parallel universe? Why does he have to sort of explain it so lengthily?
Were there problems with the term universe in scientific theory, Nick?
In copyright theory?
No.
Maybe.
We knew of galaxies, and so we knew that it wasn't just the Milky Way, that there's Andromeda and countless other galaxies. So we discovered that in the 20s? Yeah.
Is that it?
Yeah, it was in the 20th century that we discovered that there were other galaxies.
The Doctor has his identity checked with central records, but he doesn't exist, or at least he's not an agent of a foreign government. The Doctor escapes platoon underleader Benton when the drill head has the same issue it did in episode 1 in The Normal Universe, green goo everywhere. He tries to repair the computer, but stares into the barrel of the rifle. Oh look, there are men and women scientists. I've never noticed that before. I guess it's nice to know that slave labour in this parallel universe doesn't use women for the usual fascist elements of childbearing. Granted, none of them are credited because they don't speak, but still.
Oh, well, although the brigade leader does still say every technician that leaves his post will be shot or something like that. But he says his.
Yeah.
Fascist Petra is a little bit more haughty and more, doesn't put up with Sutton's nonsense. And then you've got Liz as well. She's actually seems like, pretty senior command role, doesn't she?
Yes.
The only thing that undermines that is the fact she's still wearing like a mini skirt. But there we go. That's more our universe's impact, isn't it?
Did read in the news, well, actually, I don't think this actually made it to audio recorded news, that there was a revolt because a bunch of women weren't allowed to wear mini skirts in an ad, and they all wanted to wear them because they thought it was cool or sexy or something.
And this does chime with what I vaguely remember hearing something about how on Star Trek the women actually wanted to wear the mini skirts. This universe, I think what they're trying to do is to make it seem as different as possible without going overboard. But it seeming too different that it's just too outlandish. So by having more women in equal authority figure roles, it's a subtle difference from how things were at the time. And perhaps it's to show that this isn't a totally universally evil society. Because, I mean...
Indeed, yeah, because we never see outside of the industrial complex in this quote parallel universe. So it might just be that they're living in their own delusions.
Yeah, we don't know what the world is like out beyond here. I mean, so they say it's a science labour camp, so we have some ideas. Obviously, there are labour camps and they're not going to be nice, but perhaps certain people live in luxury. We have no idea. It's that sort of a 1984-esque element there again, isn't there, where you don't know beyond Airstrip 1 what the world is like. It could all be a fiction. It could just be like Britain is some North Korea-style dictatorship that's crumbling away whilst the rest of the world is fine. Or it could be this huge three-way war between three equally awful factions. We just don't know.
No. Unless the government allows you to go outside for 2 minutes every week.
I just like the design team. They made the computer console slightly different, where they've got these shapes that fit into slots. Did you see that?
Yes.
What? Really?
Yeah,
well,
they're
cool.
like sort of like Tetris pieces that fit into the console, and it's to show different technology. And I thought, that's kind of neat. That's just a little detail to show how it's different from us.
Almost crystalline in structure.
Yeah, so it looks a bit more futuristic. See, again, it's trying to show that this perhaps, even though they seem quite horrific in some ways, perhaps they're better than us in others.
But then it probably makes sense that they are industrially advanced because they would be pursuing that to the goal of everything else, including social advancement.
I think it just backs up my theory that the Inferno is run by macro people and the Tetris pieces is more suited to a crab claw. Everything is the macro terror. They're drilling for macro gas. Starman's gas is macro juice. Everything is the macro terror.
Of course it is. And what an outlandish theory to end this episode, which has an outlandish theory about parallel universes in this episode of Doctor Who 50 years ago. Thank you very much for watching. You can find us on Blogspot, which redirects to iTunes. Leave positive comments there, it helps. You can also find us on Facebook and YouTube, where you can like, comment and subscribe. We shall be back next week to drill deeper into this parallel universe ideal in episode 4 of Inferno. Until then, I've been Ben.
I've been Luke.
And I've been Nick.
Thank you, and goodbye.